The corridors of Harmony Point were filled with frightened people. Diplomats from a dozen worlds pushed past each other, their voices loud and desperate. Some were trying to reach the escape pods, even though everyone knew the Cathari would shoot down anything that tried to leave. Others were sending final messages to their families, saying goodbye to people they would never see again. Danny Cotter walked through the chaos like a man taking a quiet stroll through a park. He moved slowly, carefully, his tablet tucked under his arm. People bumped into him and shouted at him to move, but he just stepped aside and kept walking. His face was calm. His breathing was steady. He looked like someone who had already accepted whatever was going to happen. Ambassador Nira Solon saw him from across the corridor and felt a flash of anger. She was an Andorian diplomat, one of the most important people on the station. She had spent her whole life working for peace, and now everything was falling apart. Her hands were shaking. Her heart was racing. And this human was walking around like he was on vacation. She pushed through the crowd and grabbed his arm. "Human," she said, her voice sharp. "Do you not understand what is happening? We are all going to die. The Cathari will destroy this station and everyone on it." Danny looked at her with soft eyes. He did not seem angry or afraid. He just looked curious, like he was studying her the way he studied everything else. "Maybe," he said, "but panicking will not change anything. The math is the math. They have more ships than we do." Nira stared at him. She could not understand how anyone could be so calm at a time like this. She had met many humans during her career, and they were always strange, always surprising. But this one was different. There was something in his eyes, a quiet intelligence that made her uneasy. "And what do you suggest we do?" she asked. "Wait here and die?" Danny shrugged. "I suggest we think. The Cathari have more ships, but that does not mean they have already won. There is always more to a situation than what you can see on the surface." He held up his tablet and showed her the screen. It was filled with data, charts and graphs and recordings that she did not understand. "I have been studying the Cathari for years," Danny said. "Their culture, their history, their body language. And I noticed something interesting about High Commander Zethrock during his ultimatum." Nira frowned. "What did you notice?" His antennae were twitching in a specific pattern. "It is very subtle, very hard to see unless you know what to look for. But I have seen it before, in old recordings from Cathari history. It is the pattern they display when they are bluffing." Nira felt her breath catch in her throat. "Bluffing? You think Zethrock is bluffing?" "I think something is wrong with the Cathari Empire," Danny said. "I think they are weaker than they want us to believe. And I think Zethrock is gambling everything on the hope that we will surrender without a fight." For a moment, Nira did not know what to say. If Danny was right, it would change everything. But if he was wrong, it would not matter anyway. They would all be dead in less than an hour. "How can you be sure?" she asked. Danny smiled, a small and tired smile. "I cannot be sure, but I have been watching people my whole life. Humans, aliens, it does not matter. Everyone has patterns. Everyone has tells. And Zethrock is telling me that he is afraid." He put his tablet away and started walking again. Nira followed him, her mind racing. She did not trust this human completely, but she had no better ideas. And there was something about his confidence that made her want to believe him. They reached the communication center, a large room filled with screens and consoles. A few technicians were still at their stations, trying to monitor the situation outside. Most of them looked like they had given up hope. Danny walked to one of the consoles and started typing. His fingers moved quickly, pulling up files and data that he had collected over the years. Nira watched him work, trying to understand what he was doing. "The Cathari have a complex culture," Danny said as he typed. They have poetry, music, rituals that go back thousands of years. Most people think they are just violent monsters, but that is because most people never bother to learn. They just see the claws and the armor and assume there is nothing else. He pulled up an old recording and played it. It showed a Cathari standing on a stage, speaking in a language that Nira did not understand. But the way the creature moved, the way its antennae swayed, there was something beautiful about it. "This is a death poem," Danny said. "The Cathari recite it when they are about to die in battle. It is a way of accepting their fate with honor. But there is another poem, an older one, that they recite when they have made a terrible mistake, when they have overreached and cannot win. It is a poem of shame." He found the file he was looking for and opened it. The words appeared on the screen, written in strange angular script of the Cathari language. "I learned this poem 2 years ago," Danny said. "I never thought I would need it, but I think today might be the day." Nira looked at the poem, then looked at Danny. "What are you planning to do?" "I am going to send a message to High Commander Zethrock," Danny said. "I am going to tell him that I know his secret. I am going to tell him that I see through his bluff. And I am going to do it in a way that he cannot ignore." Nira felt a chill run down her spine. "That is insane. He will kill you. He will kill all of us." Danny nodded slowly. "Maybe, but if I do nothing, he will kill us anyway. At least this way, there is a chance." He turned back to the console and started preparing his message. Nira watched him, torn between fear and hope. This human was either the bravest person she had ever met or the most foolish. She could not decide which, but as she watched him work, she realized something else. Danny Carter was not afraid to die. He had accepted that possibility a long time ago. What he was afraid of was doing nothing. What he was afraid of was standing by and watching while innocent people suffered. And that, Nira thought, was perhaps the most human thing of all. The space station called Harmony Point floated in the darkness between stars. It was a beautiful thing, built from white metal and glass, spinning slowly in the endless black. For 3 weeks, it had been home to diplomats and leaders from a dozen different worlds. They had come to talk about peace. They had come to end a war that had killed millions. Danny Carter stood by a large window, looking out at the stars. He was a tall man with brown hair and tired eyes. He wore simple clothes, not the fancy uniforms of the military officers or the colorful robes of the alien ambassadors. He was just an anthropologist, a scientist who studied cultures and customs. Earth had sent him to watch and learn, nothing more. He had no power here. He had no voice in the talks. He was just a spectator, but Danny did not mind. He liked watching. He had spent his whole life watching people, learning how they acted, why they did the things they did. He had studied tribes on distant planets and ancient civilizations on forgotten moons. He found people fascinating, whether they had 2 legs or 6, whether they breathed oxygen or methane. He took a sip of his coffee and looked at his tablet. He had been taking notes on the Cathari, the insect-like species that controlled a large empire on the edge of known space. They were proud and fierce, with hard shells and sharp mandibles. Their warriors were legendary. Their ships were fast and deadly. And right now, over 200 of those ships were gathering outside the station. Danny watched the tactical display on his tablet. The Cathari fleet had arrived that morning, dropping out of hyperspace like a swarm of angry bees. They had surrounded the station completely. There was no way out. On the main bridge of the station, Commander Lyra Voss tried to stay calm. She was an Andorian, a member of the species that had built this station and organized these peace talks. Her skin was pale silver, and her eyes were large and dark. She had served in the Andorian military for 20 years, and she had never seen anything like this. How many ships? she asked, even though she already knew the answer. 217, her tactical officer replied. They have us completely surrounded. Our fleet is outnumbered 3-1. Lyra closed her eyes for a moment. The coalition fleet was strong, but not strong enough. If the Cathari attacked, it would be a massacre. The main view screen flickered, and a face appeared. It was High Commander Zethrock, the leader of the Cathari Armada. He was massive, even for a Cathari, with a dark red shell and eyes that gleamed like black stones. His mandibles clicked together as he spoke, and his voice was cold and hard. Commander Voss, he said, the time for talking is over. The Andorian coalition will surrender unconditionally. You will hand over control of this station and all your ships. If you refuse, we will destroy everything. You have 1 hour. The screen went dark. Panic spread through the station like fire. Diplomats ran through the corridors, shouting and crying. Officers tried to organize evacuations, but there was nowhere to go. The Cathari had blocked every escape route dot in the observation gallery. Danny finished his coffee. He watched the chaos around him with quiet interest. People were screaming. Alarms were ringing. But Danny just sat in his chair and opened his tablet. He had been studying the Cathari for years. He had read every book about them, watched every recording, analyzed every piece of data he could find. Most people thought they were simple creatures, driven by violence and conquest. But Danny knew better. The Cathari had a rich culture, full of poetry and ritual and complex social rules. They were not mindless killers. They were proud warriors with a deep sense of honor. And right now, something about High Commander Zethrock did not feel right. Danny pulled up a recording of the ultimatum and watched it again. He focused on Zethrock's antennae, the 2 long feelers that grew from the top of his head. Cathari used their antennae to communicate emotion, just like humans used facial expressions. Most people did not know this. Most people did not care, but Danny cared. He had spent months learning to read Cathari body language. And what he saw in that recording made him very curious. Zethrock's antennae were twitching, not in anger or confidence, but in a specific pattern that Danny had only seen once before. He searched through his files until he found it, an old recording from 200 years ago. It showed a Cathari general named Vethanar standing before his enemies and demanding their surrender. The antennae pattern was exactly the same. Danny read the historical record attached to the file. General Vethanar had been bluffing. His army was weak, his supplies were low, and he was days away from total collapse. But he had stood before his enemies and acted like he was invincible. His bluff had worked. His enemies had surrendered, and Vethanar had become a legend. Danny looked at the recording of Zethrock again. The same pattern, the same twitch, the same bluff. He leaned back in his chair and thought about what this meant. The most powerful Cathari commander in the sector was standing outside with 200 ships, and he was bluffing. His fleet looked strong, but something was wrong. Something was making him desperate enough to gamble everything on fear. Danny started searching through more data. News reports from Cathari space. Trade records. Medical journals. Slowly, a picture began to form. The Cathari Empire was in trouble. A plague had swept through their warrior caste 6 months ago, killing thousands of their best soldiers. Their supply lines were stretched thin. Their economy was failing. Zethrock was not here to win a war. He was here to end one before his empire fell apart. Then he closed his tablet and looked out the window at the Cathari fleet. All those ships, all those weapons, and behind them, an empire made of glass, ready to shatter at the slightest touch. The question was simple. What was he going to do about it? He was just a spectator. He had no authority, no weapons, no army. He was a scientist with a tablet and a cup of coffee. But he knew something that nobody else knew. He had seen the truth hiding behind the mask. Danny stood up slowly and walked toward the communication center. He did not know if his idea would work. He did not know if anyone would listen. But he knew that he could not just sit and watch while everyone around him died. Sometimes watching was not enough. Sometimes you had to act. Danny Carter stood at the communication console, his fingers hovering over the controls. The room was quiet now. The technicians had stopped working and were watching him with wide eyes. Ambassador Nira stood behind him, her silver skin pale with fear. Everyone knew that what happened in the next few minutes would decide whether they lived or died. Dottie took a deep breath and closed his eyes. He thought about his life, about all the places he had been and all the things he had seen. He thought about Earth, the blue and green world where he had been born. He thought about his parents, who had died when he was young, and his sister, who still lived in a small town in Ohio. He had not talked to her in months. He wished he had called her more often, but there was no time for regret now. There was only time for action. He opened his eyes and typed in a frequency. It was not a normal channel, not the kind that diplomats used for official communication. It was an internal Cathari frequency, one that they used for clan business and private conversations. Danny had found it buried in an old research archive, a frequency that outsiders were never supposed to know. The console beeped, indicating that the connection was open. Danny leaned forward and began to speak. His voice was calm and clear. He spoke in the Cathari language, using words and phrases that he had practiced for years. He did not threaten. He did not beg. He simply recited the poem. It was called The Song of the Broken Blade, an ancient verse from the Cathari homeworld. It told the story of a warrior who had gone to battle with a sword that was cracked and weak. The warrior knew he could not win, but he was too proud to admit defeat. So he stood before his enemies and pretended to be strong, hoping they would run away before they discovered the truth. Danny recited every word of the poem, his pronunciation perfect. He had spent countless hours learning the rhythm and tone of the Cathari language, the way certain sounds rose and fell like music. He wanted Zethruck to understand that this was not a mistake, not an accident. He wanted Zethruck to know that a human had learned the deepest secrets of his people. When the poem was finished, Danny continued speaking. He talked about the history of the Cathari Empire, about the great battles they had won and the terrible defeats they had suffered. He talked about the plague that had swept through their warrior caste 6 months ago. The sickness that had killed thousands of their best soldiers and left their military weak and desperate. He talked about the supply lines that were stretched too thin, the factories that had closed, the colonies that were starving. He talked about the political rivals who were waiting in the shadows, ready to tear Zethruck apart if he showed any sign of weakness. And then he talked about Zethruck himself. "I have watched your recordings," Danny said. "I have studied your speeches, your commands, your private moments that you thought no one could see. I know the colors on your armor, High Commander. I know what they mean. Your clan has suffered. Your family has lost. You are not here because you are strong. You are here because you are desperate." On the bridge of the Uthari flagship, High Commander Zethruck stood frozen in shock. His officers stared at the view screen, their mandibles hanging open. They could not believe what they were hearing. A human, a weak and pathetic creature from a small blue world, was speaking their sacred language. A human was reciting poems that only the elders knew. A human was revealing secrets that should have been buried forever. Zethruck felt his blood turn cold. The human was right. Everything he said was true. The Empire was failing. The plague had destroyed their armies. The economy was collapsing. Zethruck had brought his fleet to this station, hoping to win a quick victory, to capture enough resource to save his people. But it was a gamble, a desperate roll of the dice. And now everyone knew. Danny continued speaking, his voice steady and strong. I see you, High Commander. I see the fear in your antennae. I see the weakness in your stance. You came here to frighten us, to make us surrender without a fight. But I know the truth. You cannot win this battle without destroying yourself. If you attack this station, you will spend your last ships, your last soldiers, your last hope. And when you return home, your enemies will be waiting. He paused for a moment, letting his words sink in. The human sees, he said in perfect Cathari. The human remembers. The human knows. The transmission ended. Danny stepped back from the console and let out a long breath. His hands were shaking now, the calm finally breaking. He had done everything he could. Now all he could do was wait. Ambassador Nira grabbed his arm. What happens now? She asked. Now we find out if I was right, Danny said. On the Cathari flagship, chaos erupted. The officers were shouting at each other, demanding explanations. How did the human know about the plague? How did he know about the supply problems? How did he know about the colors on the High Commander's armor? Zethrock tried to restore order, but it was too late. The transmission had been broadcast on an open channel. Every ship in the fleet had heard it. Every captain, every soldier, every warrior knew that their leader had been exposed. One of the captains, a young officer named Kethful, stepped forward. His antennae were rigid with anger. Is it true? He demanded. Is what the human said true? Did you bring us here to die? Zethrock did not answer. He could not answer. The silence was enough. The fleet began to fracture. Ships that had been holding formation started to drift apart. Captains argued over their communication channels, accusing each other of treason and betrayal. Some demanded to retreat. Others wanted to attack anyway, to die with honor rather than live with shame. On Harmony Point, Commander Lyra Voss watched the chaos unfold on her tactical display. She could not believe what she was seeing. The most powerful fleet in the sector was tearing itself apart, and it had all started with a single human and a poem. She looked at Danny Carter, standing quietly in the corner of the bridge. He was sipping a cup of coffee, watching the screens with the same calm expression he always wore. He did not look like a hero. He did not look like a warrior. He just looked like a man who had noticed something interesting and decided to share it. And that, Lyra realized, was the most terrifying thing of all. The Cathari fleet was falling apart. Danny watched the tactical display from the observation gallery, his coffee growing cold in his hands. The screen showed over 200 warships, and almost all of them were breaking formation. Some were drifting away from the station. Others were turning to face each other, their weapons powering up. The communication channels were filled with angry voices, captains shouting accusations at each other across the void. Danny had hoped his message would create doubt. He had not expected it to create civil war. Commander Lyra Voss stood at the center of the bridge, her silver skin glowing in the light of the screens. She had been a soldier for 20 years, and she had never seen anything like this. The enemy fleet, the most powerful force in the sector, was destroying itself without firing a single shot at them. What is happening? She asked, turning to her tactical officer. They are fighting each other, Commander, the officer replied, his voice filled with disbelief. Captain Kethful has accused High Commander Zethrock of treason. Several other captains have joined him. They are demanding that Zethrock step down and submit to trial. Lyra shook her head. How is this possible? 1 hour ago, they were ready to destroy us. Now they are fighting among themselves? Her officer had no answer. None of them did. They just stood and watched as the mighty Cathari fleet tore itself apart. On the flagship, High Commander Zethrock was fighting for his life. Not with weapons, but with words. He stood on his bridge, surrounded by officers who no longer trusted him, trying to explain himself. The human was lying, he said, his mandibles clicking rapidly. It was a trick, a manipulation. We are not weak. Our empire is not failing. The plague was contained months ago, but his officers did not believe him. They had heard the truth in Danny's words. They had seen the way their commander's antennae twitched with fear. They knew that the human had spoken secrets that only someone with deep knowledge could know. Captain Kethvil stepped forward again. He was young and ambitious, and he had never liked Zethrock. Now he saw his chance to rise. The human knew about the plague, Kethvil said. He knew about our supply lines. He knew about your clan's losses. How could an outsider know these things unless they were true? Zethrock had no answer. The truth was, he did not know how Danny had learned so much. He had spent years hiding his empire's weakness from the galaxy. He had killed spies and silenced traitors. And yet, a simple human anthropologist had uncovered everything. It does not matter how he knew, Zethrock said finally. What matters is that we complete our mission. We must take this station. We must capture its resources. If we retreat now, we will return home with nothing. And if we attack? Kethvil asked. How many of us will die? How many ships will we lose? Can our empire survive another defeat? The question hung in the air like poison. Zethrock looked around at his officers and saw doubt in their eyes. They were warriors, bred for battle, trained to fight without fear. But they were not stupid. They could see that this war had already cost them too much. Back on Harmony Point, Ambassador Nira found Danny in the observation gallery. He was still sitting in his chair, still watching the chaos unfold. His face was calm, but his eyes were tired. You did this, she said, sitting down beside him. You broke their fleet with words. Danny shook his head slowly. I did not break anything. The cracks were already there. I just showed them where to look. Nira studied his face, trying to understand him. She had met many humans over the years, and they were always surprising. Some were loud and aggressive. Others were quiet and kind. But Danny was something else entirely. He was patient. He was observant. He saw things that others missed. Why? She asked. Why do you care so much about understanding other species? Most humans I have met are only interested in themselves. Danny thought about the question for a long moment. When I was young, he said finally, I felt like I did not belong anywhere. I did not understand the people around me. I did not understand why they did the things they did. So I started watching them. I started studying them. And slowly, I began to understand. He looked out at the stars, his expression distant. When humans first went to space, we found that we were not alone. There were hundreds of species out there, each with their own cultures, their own beliefs, their own ways of living. And I realized that I had been given a gift. I could spend my whole life watching and learning. I could try to understand every culture in the galaxy. Nira nodded slowly. And the Cathari? Did you understand them? Better than most, Danny said. They are not monsters. They are proud and fierce, but they also have poetry and music and love. They care about their families. They honor their ancestors. They dream of a better future for their children. In many ways, they are not so different from us. A warning alarm sounded across the station. Nira jumped to her feet, her heart racing. But Danny remained calm, looking at his tablet. Do not worry, he said. It is not an attack. Look. He pointed at the tactical display. 2 of the Cathari ships had broken away from the fleet and were heading away from the station. Their engines were burning bright, pushing them toward the edge of the sector. They are leaving, Nira said, her voice filled with wonder. They are retreating. They are going home, Danny corrected her. Captain Kethvil has convinced them that this mission is a failure. They would rather return to their families than die for a leader who lied to them. More ships began to follow. One by one, the great warships of the Cathari fleet turned away from Harmony Point and started their long journey home. Some still stayed with Zethrock, loyal to the end. But their numbers were shrinking by the minute. Commander Lyra Voss watched from the bridge, tears forming in her dark eyes. They were going to survive. Against all odds, against all logic, they were going to survive. And it was all because of one human who had been watching. 3 hours had passed since Danny Carter sent his transmission. 3 hours that changed the course of galactic history. The Cathari fleet was gone. Most of the ships had retreated, their captains unwilling to follow a leader they no longer trusted. Some had defected entirely, sending messages to the coalition, offering information in exchange for sanctuary. Only a handful of vessels remained, floating silently in the darkness, their crews uncertain what to do next. High Commander Zethrock stood alone on his bridge. His officers had abandoned him one by one until only a few loyal guards remained. He looked at the tactical display, at the empty spaces where his fleet used to be, and felt something he had not felt in many years. Shame. He had been the greatest commander in the Cathari Empire. He had won battles that were supposed to be impossible. He had conquered worlds and crushed rebellions. And now, he had been defeated by a human who had never held a weapon in his life. The communication console beeped. Zethrock looked at it for a long moment, then walked over and answered. Commander Lyra Voss appeared on the screen. Her silver face was calm, but there was a hint of triumph in her dark eyes. "High Commander," she said, "your fleet has abandoned you. Your mission has failed. I am offering you one chance to surrender peacefully. If you refuse, our ships will destroy what remains of your forces." Zethrock wanted to laugh. He wanted to scream. He wanted to order his remaining ships to attack, to die in battle like a true warrior. But he knew it would be pointless. The human had taken everything from him. His fleet, his honor, his future. "I accept your terms," he said, his voice hollow. "The Cathari Empire surrenders unconditionally." The words felt like poison in his mouth. But there was nothing else he could do. On Harmony Point, the news of the surrender spread like wildfire. Diplomats cheered and hugged each other. Officers laughed and cried. After weeks of fear and tension, the war was over. They had won. Danny Carter did not celebrate. He sat in his usual chair in the observation gallery, watching the stars and thinking about everything that had happened. He did not feel like a hero. He felt tired. He felt old. He felt like a man who had stumbled into something much bigger than himself. Ambassador Nira found him there an hour later. She sat down beside him and handed him a fresh cup of coffee. "The council wants to see you," she said. "They want to thank you for what you did." Danny took the coffee and sipped it slowly. "I did not do anything special. I just noticed some things." Nira shook her head. "You ended a war without firing a shot. You saved thousands of lives. That is not nothing." "Maybe," Danny said. "But I did not plan any of this. I was just watching, like I always do. And I saw something that did not make sense. So I investigated. That is all." Nira studied him for a long moment. "Is that really how you see yourself? Just a watcher?" Danny thought about the question. He thought about his life, about all the years he had spent studying cultures and learning languages and trying to understand why people did the things they did. He had never wanted to be a hero. He had never wanted to change the galaxy. He just wanted to understand it. "Humans are curious," he said finally. "We cannot help it. We see something interesting, and we have to know more. We have to understand. It is what makes us human." Nira nodded slowly. "The Andorians have a saying, 'Knowledge is the sharpest blade.' I never understood it until today." Danny smiled. a small and tired smile. The Ketheri have a similar saying. They who watch the longest see the most. I learned it years ago when I first started studying them. I never thought it would save my life. The next day, Danny was summoned before the Coalition Council. He stood in a large chamber, surrounded by admirals and ambassadors from a dozen different worlds. They looked at him with a mixture of respect and fear, like he was some kind of weapon they did not understand. Admiral Greg Palmer, Earth's military liaison, stepped forward. He was a tall man with gray hair and a stern face. "Danny Carter," he said, "you ended a war without firing a single weapon. You broke the most powerful fleet in the sector with nothing but words. The council wants to know how you did it." Danny looked around the chamber at all the powerful people staring at him. He felt small and out of place, like a child who had wandered into a room full of giants. "I watched," he said simply. "That is all I did. I watched and I learned. I paid attention to things that other people ignored. And when I saw the truth, I shared it." The admirals exchanged glances. They did not seem satisfied with his answer. But how? Admiral Palmer pressed. "How did you know so much about the Ketheri? How did you see through their bluff?" Danny thought about how to explain it. "Humans have spent our entire history watching," he said. "We watch animals and plants. We watch the stars and the planets. We watch each other. It is what we do. The Ketheri thought we were harmless because we are not strong or fast or long-lived. They forgot that the most dangerous thing in the universe is not a weapon. It is someone who pays attention." The chamber fell silent. The admirals and ambassadors looked at each other, processing what he had said. After that day, the Andorians started calling humans the Watchers. Other species heard the story of Harmony Point and began to wonder what else the humans had noticed. Trade delegations became more careful about what they revealed. Military commanders started watching their body language around human observers. The galaxy had learned a valuable lesson. Humans were not just spectators. They were witnesses. They remembered everything they saw. Danny Carter returned to Earth a few weeks later. He published his research on Ketheri social dynamics and went back to being an anthropologist. He never thought of himself as a hero. He never bragged about what he had done. He just continued doing what he had always done, watching and learning and trying to understand. But across the galaxy, empires looked at the small blue world called Earth and wondered what the humans were watching now. And that, perhaps, was the greatest victory of all.